Welcome back. You're watching France 24. Before we resume the France 24 debate, a sample of the stories that Catherine Nicholson will be following for you at the top of the hour. Police failures blamed in the Hillsborough disaster of 1989, that stadium disaster that killed 96 Liverpool fans. The jury verdict paves the way for possible prosecutions. Donald Trump looks to sweep Republican primaries in 5 eastern states. We'll give you the latest on the doings in places like Pennsylvania and Connecticut. Opening day of the trial in Luxembourg of 3 whistleblowers accused of uncovering the confidential tax breaks for corporations that were made public in the LuxLeaks scandal. The French finance minister expresses his solidarity with the defendants, all of whom are French. France wins a €34 billion contract to build 12 submarines for Australia's Navy, beating out bids from Germany and Japan. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're looking at the lessons learned from the 1986 Chernobyl disaster. We're doing so in the company of reporter and filmmaker Tanya Rachmanova. Welcome back. Bruno Combi, who heads Environmentalists for Nuclear Energy, and from Greenpeace, Cyril Cormier. 30 years ago today, April the 26th, 1986, and again, commemorations taking place not only in Ukraine, but also in Belarus and Russia.
I'm proud of those guys who were with me and who are not with me now. And I'm mourning. 30 years is a long time. A few of us are still alive, but more are dying from year to year.
After 30 years, we felt like we had finally started to move on. But when the disaster happened in Fukushima, it started to hurt again.
We come here every year, and every year it feels like the disaster was yesterday. Someone said 30 years has passed, but I can't believe that. Our children are adults already. We're old people now.
Yeah, we heard one of the men there referring to the so-called liquidators, those people who went in to clean up the mess when it happened. Very brave of them. Many of them died, Tanya Rachmanova.
Oh, yeah, that was the very beginning. This is an awful story with liquidators, exactly because there was this secret around it. They went there with no proper information, not well equipped, and coming after this back, they didn't get necessary help. They were left for themselves. Then the help came little by little, but still, even up to today, you never know. I went to this hospital in Moscow for children who have the blood cancer, and they never know. And a lot come from this region, and you never know. Is it the consequences of Chernobyl? Is it not?
Cyril Cormier, the official toll 500 killed. What do you think, or what does Greenpeace say is the real death toll?
Greenpeace released some analysis back in 2006, I think, about the death toll, and evaluated that it was, first of all, very difficult to track exactly the impact of this accident on health and how many died. But overall, the estimation was dozens of thousands of people who died during the
Tens
accident.
of thousands.
Tens of thousands. And after, years after, I remember much later some analysis and scientific analysis were released from Russia, from Belarus, who were showing much higher figures, up to 900,000 people who were impacted by on their health and finally died from this accident. So the figure is probably in between, but it's a very strong and very high death toll.
Bruno Combi?
I don't agree with the numbers which were mentioned by Cyril. It's always easy to put a few additional zeros, and Greenpeace is pretty good at that sort of sport. But in the official death toll, as was reminded, is 56. Those are the ones that we know have died from the accident. So it's not a non-story. It's a real tragedy. 56 persons died. There may be more in delayed, but then it's not a certainty, because the statistics are that there's been several thousand cases of thyroid cancer which might be attributed to the accident. But thyroid cancer usually is not deadly. You don't die from thyroid cancer. If it's properly treated, you can live with that all your
We've all
life.
seen those
Of course,
reports.
it's not present at all.
We've all seen those reports in children's wards and hospitals around the contaminated area. Surely that is directly related to to what happened at Chernobyl.
Well, the case of leukemia has been studied quite extensively. And in the case of Chernobyl, it has not been proven that there was an increase in leukemia. In fact, the World Health Organization studied this very carefully and concluded that there was no increase in the leukemia. In the case of Chernobyl, it might be for other cases or accidents, but in this case. But there is an increase in the thyroid cancers. But the numbers are not as high as Greenpeace pretends, that's for sure. Now, the thing is that you also have to see that we live today in the 21st century, and our modern civilization is powered with energy. And one way or another, we do require energy. Of course, if it was just easy that you just have to say, no, we don't need it, and we just take it away, that's perfect. But the thing is, whatever you do, you need some energy. And any way to produce energy costs a lot of money and has a lot of risks. And nuclear power, when you look at the statistics, even when you include Chernobyl and Fukushima, it's in fact much safer than all the other alternatives. We need a baseload supply of energy in general and of electricity in particular. And when the reactors are well done, it's a very safe energy. It is safe, it is available, it is not intermittent like wind or solar, which produces energy only when the wind is blowing or the sun is shining. We need power all the time to power the cities, to power the factories. So we're very lucky to live in a world today where we have abundant food and we have a high lifestyle and warm homes in winter. And we should be careful that we need those power sources. Of course, we should choose the best one, but up today, there's no better than nuclear power.
So I personally, I don't believe that we have to choose between the life, even if there are a few lives, but they are very important, and the production of energy. There are today many ways to produce energy in a very soft way that are getting less and less expensive, and those are the renewables.
Okay, but when we had the Paris Climate Change Summit, people agreed with you, but said it's going to take a while, it has to come on board, and even those who don't who don't agree with Bruno Combi, who think that there is a risk involved with nuclear energy, say we need it for this transition period.
But that's interesting. Transition period is fine with us, of course. Greenpeace published different scenarios showing that in 20 years, for example, in France, we can phase out nuclear. So we're quite happy with this situation of transition. But today, saying that, for example, nuclear is the best way to fight climate change is a lie. It's 2% of the electricity, of the energy of the world, and it's a much...
Three-quarters of the electricity in this country.
In France, but that's very specific. And if you notice, President Hollande himself considered that situation was not a stable situation. And when did he decide that? Just after Fukushima. Why? Because we're too much dependent on this electricity from nuclear, and nuclear in France is aging. Nuclear reactors are aging, and it creates a new situation where we have to invest a lot of money in those old reactors, and instead of spending that money in old reactors, we should spend them in renewables. It's less expensive and it's safer.
We're seeing now the cost, Bruno Combi, of decommissioning plants. The oldest one in France, near the German border at Fessenheim, still hasn't been decommissioned. And people are saying that this could push major players like the French nuclear giant Areva or the French energy giant EDF into bankruptcy, having to close these 58 nuclear power plants.
No. Fessenheim is not even 40 years old today. In the United States, 80 of the 99 nuclear reactors have been granted life extensions up to 60 years of age. So Fessenheim is not an old reactor. Of course, we are all aging with time. We get older. It doesn't mean you have to kill everybody before you get any form of disease or problem. Fessenheim is still a fairly young, mature reactor, dans la force de l'âge, as we say in France. It has been recognized as safe by the French Safety Authority. It has undergone several hundred million euros of updates to improve the safety, so it's among the safest French nuclear reactors today. So
the German press
Fessenheim
recently accused the French of downplaying and covering up a mishap that happened back in 2014 at that plant.
Well, the German Environment Ministry backed up immediately on the same day, saying they finally made a mistake and it wasn't true. So this is Fessenheim is a good reactor. It's safe. Okay, and it should not be closed right away. Of course, it will close at some point when it becomes unsafe.
All right. How about some of the other reactors? There's one near the Luxembourg border that they want closed. There's Le Budget, which is where there's been a lawsuit that's been. We can look at the map there.
It's interesting that the German, the Luxembourg, and the Swiss are wanting to give lessons to the French people. But then when Germany needs power, they're very happy to buy the electricity from France. So there's a somewhat of a bit hypocrite.
The reverse is true.
Hypocrite thing there. And yes, but it's not the same.
We're buying
because
a lot of cheap electricity from Germany. It's not correct.
It's quite different because the sun and wind electricity from Germany is imposed on the grid at the moment you usually don't need it. When nuclear power is base load power, so it's always there when you need it. It's quite different, in fact.
Tanya Rachmanova, I want your reaction to a report that was in French newspaper Le Monde, the one published Monday evening. It said, as authorities continue to insist that there can be no Chernobyl, no Fukushima here in France, the president of the French Nuclear Safety Authority gave an interview. He warns that a major nuclear accident is possible. The problem, he says, is not the technology. He says the problem is money, and the fact that right now there's not as much money to invest and not as much money to invest in health and safety checks. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it's probably true, because what I don't understand, when you say that the reactor is in an age, etc. When it was designed, the designers of this reactor, who were highly respectable engineers, they previewed that this reactor, its life is 40 years. How can we say that we can prolong the life? I mean, it was designed for 40 years, full stop. You have to stop it. You have to close it. Or you have to have a public debate, by the way.
It was designed to last at least 40 years, and then depending on the result of the inspections, perhaps more. So now we're approaching the 40 years, so you undergo a medical check. It's like a car.
No, it's the other way around. Sorry. It was the other way around, because I saw the document. It was not the other. It was 40 years unless they say that it's possible to continue. And this is a very different formula.
No, that's something else.
It means you have to prove that it could go on.
Yes, that's right.
But where are the proofs?
The safety authority at any moment, even before 40 years, can stop the nuclear plants. And that's a good thing, we all agree. It can stop it before 40 years, after 40 years, at any moment, for any reason, if the safety is important. But from the technological point of view, it was designed to last at least 40 years. Then if something goes wrong, it could stop earlier.
Yes.
But if everything is okay and all the components are in very good condition, it's like a car. If necessary, you can change the tires, you can renew the brakes, you can change
if it's necessary. 40 years, it was the red line, and it's written in the document.
No, it was not a red line that you needed to stop it after 40 years.
I would like to add maybe something on the perspective of the future in France. The reactors are aging, and it will cost some money to extend their lifetime above after 40 years. It will. The evaluation today is about 100 billion. It goes up to 200 billion if you increase the level of safety required for each reactors. If you put all that money in renewables, you will be able to phase out reactors, nuclear reactors in France, you will be able to have a safe and sufficient access to green electricity coming from renewables, and that's the direction of the future. I mean, that's the best way to produce cheap electricity, to provide cheap electricity in France, but in the world.
Okay, but then answer me this, because in China, where they're ahead of the curve when it comes to renewables,
they invest so much, $1 billion.
They're also investing heavily in nuclear power plants.
Actually, they're reducing their plans. Back in 2010, their plans to 2020 was 130 gigawatts. In 2014, they reduced it to 75, and now we're at 50 gigawatts. And the reason is because they've developed renewable energy, and this energy is cheaper, it's easier to handle, and it creates much more job and a much better economy. That's the reason why China is not yet phasing out nuclear, but it's stopping the development of nuclear because it's cheaper, it's safer, and the Fukushima accident really had a strong impact on the Chinese on that. And that's also an important thing to understand, is that there is also no future to French nuclear industry. We haven't sold a lot of nuclear plants abroad of France, only 11 reactors in the total of 400. We are not going to sell any other reactors in the world. There is no market for that. The market today is for renewables because it's cheap, because it's sufficient to produce electricity, and it's safe. And the best way to avoid such kind of accident as Chernobyl is to phase out progressively nuclear.
Not only China is going nuclear, but it's also buying the nuclear technology from France. And why is that? It's because it's simply the best nuclear technology in the world. So I don't agree with your pessimisms about the future of nuclear power. You see,
well, if they bought it, we will never sell any anyway.
I am an ecologist.
They bought it already.
And as an ecologist, I built my own home, and it's a positive energy house. I invite you to visit. It's in the suburbs of Paris. It's very interesting to see how these sort of homes can indeed reduce the energy requirement. But it's also very interesting to see that although I produce more energy than I need over the year, in winter, when the climate is cold, I'm still very happy to be connected on the electrical grid, because it's not an autonomous house where you don't need energy at all. It's just that at some moment I produce more than I need, and at other moment I need the electricity, and I'm happy to be connected on the French electric grid, which provides me with abundant, cheap, affordable and safe electricity produced by the French nuclear reactors.
Hang on a second.
So we still need it, even if we go ecologist, even with the positive.
It's not a general situation.
Well, if you want to run the factories and the cities,
is it that affordable? Are we paying? It's true that the utility bills are much lower than our neighbors, no question there. But when the cost, you look at the cost of decommissioning even one of these plants, that's being paid for by the taxpayer.
We know about the cost of decommissioning because the United States has already decommissioned about a dozen nuclear reactors down to ground where nothing is left, and you can build a school on top of the field. It's zero contamination left over.
Honestly.
Well, you can go there. It's open to the
risky.
public. The fences are all taken out, and it's back to public use. And the cost is very precisely 10 to 15% of the cost of the construction of the reactor. It's always much cheaper to deconstruct anything
still a lot
than
of zeros.
to construct it. It's still a lot of zeros, but when you put it in perspective with the amount of energy that it provides, it's not a very big amount.
Cyril Cormier, your group Greenpeace has several times over the past couple of years, both in France and in Sweden, scaled the walls of nuclear power plants to show how easy it is to penetrate them. We mentioned at the outset how the next Chernobyl could be on purpose. We saw recently Belgian authorities saying that there had been a bit of a stakeout of nuclear power plants there by the jihadists who perpetrated those attacks in Brussels. How serious is that threat?
Well, that's really one of our top concerns right now, indeed, because, like you mentioned, it's we know and we've identified how risky and sensitive the reactors are to external attacks. Bruno Combi mentioned that the new EPR has a double containment.
This is the next generation nuclear power plant.
Exactly, which is supposed to resist to the crash of an airplane, which means that the other reactors in France are not protected. If someone wants to go through that kind of attack on the reactors. These reactors are not supposed to be able to resist to such a crash of an airplane. And this is a really strong concern, as well as the protection, for example, of the pool where the waste is stored after used, which are not sufficiently protected and could be attacked from outside the plant.
Tanya Rachmanova, is this something that worries you when you look at drones that have been flying over nuclear installations? I think that the numbers are quite staggering over the past couple of years.
Of course it is. I think that in the actual situation today, not only because we are 30 years after Chernobyl, but we have to rethink the nuclear electric power situation and to build a new concept for France. And I don't see why we can't buy the energy from the European countries. We buy so many things from other countries. Why energy should be produced nationally if there is such a risk? Is the risk of attack on the top of other risks that we know. And also maybe we are ready probably to reduce a little bit consumption of energy, or probably some of us, or maybe most of us, are ready to pay a little bit more to be a little bit safer, because 100% safety doesn't exist. And an accident in a nuclear power station is not like in mines. You know, you say coal mines, the people are dying. Yes, they are, but with no such awful ecological consequences.
I think the ecological consequences of coal are much worse, in fact. You see, what makes nuclear energy so different is what I call the factor 1 million. Just 1 gram of uranium produces as much energy as 1 ton of coal, oil, or gas. 1 gram to 1 ton is a factor 1 million. Now, of course, we will all agree that the best source of energy is the one that requires nothing at all, zero. But unfortunately, you always need at least some construction materials. You need some sensors. You need something to produce. And the closest to zero that we have, in fact, is nuclear power. A factor 1 million. Can you imagine that? It's really something.
But you have the nuclear waste.
The nuclear waste is produced in accordingly small proportions. When you consume 1 gram of uranium, you produce 1 gram of waste.
But the nuclear waste,
So
but also
it is very small amounts, and these waste are solid waste. It's heavy. It's heavy atoms. In fact, it's the heaviest atoms on Earth. The radioactive ones are the big ones that are unstable. So they're very heavy. They don't move. So it's very easily to confine them and contain them, so that they don't go back out into the environment.
Bruno Combi, these claims that militants could have been staking out nuclear power plants, does that make you change your way of looking at the safety of nuclear power?
No, for the following reason. When Greenpeace penetrates fraudulously in the French nuclear power plants...
There is nobody in the nuclear power
No,
plants.
there
That's
is.
the reality.
There is. The thing is
There's
that as soon
inside.
as they're identified as being Greenpeace guys...
How do you identify it's a Greenpeace guy?
Well, should the French army be shooting at you when you go do that?
No.
Well,
that's not what I'm saying.
quite a
It's just
problem.
what you're just going to say, which is
I
know
suggest-
it's a Greenpeace guy.
I would suggest
It's not
that
true. They know
Greenpeace-
nothing because they're not in the nuclear plant.
I
There
would
is
sugge-
nobody inside the nuclear
I would suggest
plant.
that you try to do the same thing in a Russian nuclear power plant to see what happens to the militants. I think you would stop pretty quickly, and I'm not sure you'd be very happy if the French army reacted in a more violent way. It's because it's the Greenpeace guys that the French army don't take action. If it really was terrorism, it would not happen in the same manner.
How did they know? But how did they know?
How would they know? They're
Well,
not
Did
even
they know
there.
it was
You
Greenpeace?
go out with a big board saying it's
But
Greenpeace.
they can go with
it's
the
pretty
board.
easy to see it. You have the cameras and the
Right,
television
but
crews
are you really-
filming.
are you
and
really
Colby, the
believing
point
what
is
you're
that
saying?
it is possible to scale the fences. It is possible to get in.
It's very
No,
easy.
one technical element that you have to understand in this case is that in a nuclear power plant you have 3 protected zones, one after each other. Greenpeace goes into the first zone.
No, we go to the top of the reactors and to the top of the
Well,
pool.
you
The
could-
picture
in the
that's
top-
so clear. If you
in-
look
in
at
the top of the
2014 Fessenheim action
Look,
or the Tricastin the
all
year
the nuclear
before,
material-
the situation was the same. Our
Please, I let you-
activists, to show the aging of these reactors, were on the top of the reactors and on the top of the pool. That's the situation. The pictures are so clear, you can't even deny it.
I have to answer to this. All the nuclear material is contained inside that concrete containment. Greenpeace never entered the containment because that's a much
Of
more
course, we're on
difficult
the
thing
top
to
of the
do.
reactor.
Well, but
We're
on
not
the
looking
top
at
of the
it. It's very
reactor,
dangerous,
on the
actually,
top of
to
a
enter
reactor, you
inside.
can do absolutely nothing.
Oh, yeah.
How do you want to destroy that 1 meter thick of reinforced concrete on the top of the reactor? Even an airplane cannot do it, contrary to what you just said. All the French reactors were designed to withstand a plane crash from the very beginning.
Not from an airliner.
Not from a very large
Not from
airline,
an airliner.
not in every
No.
circumstance, but I don't think you should go into these details on television. If anything happened, you might have a responsibility in these things. Now, that's one important thing. But the fact that we do need the energy, what's your solution? I understand you prefer coal to
Renewables,
nuclear
of
power.
course.
Well,
Renewables.
renewable can contribute to some extent, a little bit, but unfortunately, on a day without wind and without sun, there's no
So last year,
renewables.
the
And we
ADEME,
still
which
need
is
the
a
energy.
state institution, has released a scenario which was 100% renewable, 100% electricity, showing that it was completely possible every day, every minute of the day, to produce sufficient electricity from renewables at a cost which was comparable to the one produced by nuclear. So what you're saying is not true. We are today producing electricity from the last wind turbines were installed in France, about 55 euro per megawatt hour. That's very close to the cost of production of reactors, of nuclear reactors. Solar has so much decreased that now we are reaching 65 euro per megawatt hour. So that's also very close to the cost of nuclear reactors today. And if you look at EPRs, they produced 100 or 120 euro per megawatt hour. So that's almost the double of what
next generation. We're out of time, but I want to thank you, Cyril Cormier. I want to thank as well Tanya Rachmanova, Bruno Combi. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.